Ruthless Compassion is a podcast that shows you how to become fiercely kind. I'm the host, Dr. Marcia Sirota, and in each episode, I get into it with experts and regular folks about the things that get in the way of what we want. Things like addiction and mental health, isolation and loneliness, difficult family and work relationships, and the importance of self-care. I want to help you overcome the obstacles to living your best life, and I want to inspire you to become a powerful kindness warrior. David Hopkins is a writer. His work includes the short story collection We Miss All the Great Parties and the burlesque memoir The Wild and Wayward Tales of Tammi. David has been a regular contributor to D Magazine and Smart Pop Books. He has also written comic books and graphic novels in a variety of genres. For 12 years, he taught English and creative writing at Martin High School, where he served as a writing coach for interscholastic competitions. Welcome, David Hopkins. Welcome, David Hopkins. It's wonderful to have you on the Ruthless Compassion Show.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Well, I found you from this very interesting article on Medium about anti-intellectualism, and I was just wondering what brought you to write this article.
Well, how it actually started was I wrote it as part of I was part of an organization called Big D Reads, which is it's an organization to encourage reading and the joy of reading in the city of Dallas. And I was invited to speak at this event called Naked Stage. And so I put together this little talk. It was a little bit more geared towards that event, but I went up there and I delivered it, and it was very well received. I think a lot of people really got what I was talking about and kind of where I was coming from. And so I later decided to adapt it into something that I could put on the internet and share with more people.
I see. And what was it about this theme that compelled you to write about it and speak about it?
Well, there's been a few things. I think a few people have been writing about this subject recently. There was a book called Idiot America that had come out, and particularly in the United States, I think that there was this sense that scientific consensus, the idea that the scientific community, while we can't say that something is a law, we have enough information to where we can speak with enough certainty that you can act on it. And it seemed like, particularly in the United States, that decisions had been made regarding stem cell research, regarding vaccines, regarding global warming and climate change, that just ignored the facts that were in front of us. And not only that, the political climate was getting to the point where, being a well-educated, informed individual was now something that was looked down upon. But all of it for me came back to the television sitcom Friends and the character of Ross.
Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. When I grew up watching Friends, I was in high school when the show was popular, and I watched it all through college. And so in many ways, I kind of came of age with that show always running in the background. And one thing that I began to notice about the character Ross is that he starts off as a romantic, kind of glum, but definitely a character who believed that good things were possible in the world. And slowly but surely, over the course of 10 years, the character kind of went insane. And so I began to explore what was it about that character where he got pushed over the edge. And part of it, I think, is he was surrounded by people that were continually groaning and rolling their eyes and sighing anytime he talked about his interests, which were paleontology, which were science, which were intellectual endeavors, and his friends were just constantly beating him down on these points. And I would imagine that after 10 years of doing that, it might drive anybody crazy. And so Ross, in some ways, became sort of a proxy for what I felt like what was going on in America, which is people were just rolling their eyes at scientific consensus, about intellectuals, about, intelligence, about people that really had something important to say.
Do you think that there's some kind of, I don't want to say conspiracy, but some kind of push against people using their brains in our political milieu these days?
I'm probably going to show my hand here, and I will get in trouble by conservatives, but I remember what Stephen Colbert once said, which is that we all know that reality has a well-known liberal bias. And even though I don't necessarily think that that is true, I do think that there are certain political agendas that sort of fly in the face of what we know to be healthy, what we know to be safe. And this goes all the way back even to the issue of lead in our plumbing and lead in our paint. There was a massive, pushback against science, which was saying this stuff is dangerous, but because it hurt our economic interests, we were, when you're not on the right side, your only option left is to attack the person who has those opinions. And so discrediting science, discrediting scientists, I think became popular in order to further certain political objectives. Now, I don't think that that's limited to conservatives. I do think that certain economic theories, when it's convenient, we ignore what some very intelligent conservatives have to say on that subject because it doesn't necessarily support our thesis. So I don't want to make it a liberal-conservative issue, but I do think that in recent years, conservatives have been a little bit more guilty of this in trying to sort of discredit intellectual scientists, people who have something to say in order to support their cause.
And you say you use the show Friends as an example, but do you see real life examples, other kinds of examples of this as you go through your life?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about society-wide, there was a time in which Jenny McCarthy came out against vaccines, and she cited information about vaccines that it was factually incorrect. The study wasn't what it was, but what happened is, because she came out against this, and her own son had autism, and I understand that there's a lot of personal issues wrapped up in her opinions on this, but her stance against vaccines really caused quite a bit of harm to other parents who were afraid that vaccines would cause autism, and you were far more likely for your child to die of the flu, to die of smallpox, of any number of things that vaccines treat, simply because you were worried about autism, when the two just simply weren't connected. And I think that's a great example where, an opinion actually overturned what was, in fact, pretty well-established scientific fact.
Yes, I remember that, and I remember that this doctor was actually, his medical license was revoked,
yes,
and all his research was discredited as being not fact-based, and yet you get a celebrity saying an opinion, and it becomes the truth.
Yeah, and this happens all the time in the 24-hour news cycle, where when we have an opinion, it seems fair and balanced to bring on someone who has the opposite opinion. But what we do when we have two people up there, one for and one against, is we create this perception that both of them have equal weight and equal merit. And when one is speaking louder than the other, we tend to listen to the louder person when they may, in fact, not have the right information or accurate information. I don't know if this happens to you, but I read so much stuff online that I can quote articles, but I don't remember where I got it from. And so I'm like, I remember reading somewhere it said this. And I do that so much. I think as a society we've done that, where we've heard things and we would spend the rest of our day fact-checking each other, just to make sure that things were accurate. A great example of this is the idea that 50% of all marriages end in divorce, which the New York Times, I do remember my source on this, the New York Times released an article that just said that's not true. The number is probably closer to maybe 30% of all marriages end in divorce. But even that statistic is misleading, because when you factor in people who get married young, actually factor them out, the marriage rate is much, much higher. The fact is that outlier of young people who get married, they throw off the stats. So if you get married in your late 20s and even into your later 30s, the chances of you staying married are actually really high. It's just all those darn 18-year-olds that get married right out of high school and then get divorced a year later. They throw off the statistic. But try telling that to someone who likes to mindlessly throw out that stat.
Well, I think that you're making a really terrific point, because I remember in high school when we would be doing debates, both sides would have to bring in factual evidence. They couldn't just speak off the cuff and express opinion. They had to have something to back up what they were saying. And today, people just say what they believe based in nothing, and they're listened to, and that's kind of frightening.
Yeah, and I mean, and you can even extend this to when we're talking about psychology or even treating mental health. People have a perception and they have feelings that do not line up with the reality of their situation. And I imagine it has to be very difficult to show people that what they're feeling and what is actually happening are not lining up.
Sometimes, yeah. But I think it's more prevalent than just with people who have psychological issues.
Oh, yes.
I think our whole society is very much focusing on, like you said, on this anti-intellectual bent, and opinion has become much more valuable than fact. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I think that there is some. I think that's true. I do think, and a lot of people who were commenting on my Friends article commented that it didn't just start with Friends, and I agree with that. And I agree with that in the article. In the article, I actually say that I think America in particular, I can't speak to Canada, but I think America in particular has always had an anti-intellectual bent. I just feel that we are now kind of at a low point in this issue. But if you look at writers like Washington Irving, Mark Twain, these are all very intelligent writers who sort of play dumb. They like to play the character who's the folksy individual who sort of overthrows the established intellectualisms with their homespun wisdom and their pluck and their sort of cowboy spirit. And that's a very common theme in American literature and in American society, is the idea of sort of the unwashed hick that can go into Washington and make change because he overthrows those smart people who think they know it all with their own sort of style and spunk, I guess. And the fact is at the end of the day, we need intelligent politicians. We need well-educated people making well-informed decisions. And so while this has always gone on in America, I do think that this sort of anti-intellectual bent, it is wrapped up in this idea of putting more credence in the opinion, that we need to hear all sides. And I think that there's something to that, but at the same time, at the end of the day, climate change doesn't care about my opinion. Vaccines don't care whether or not I believe in them or not. There are things that work. And, another thing that has made America great is pragmatism. And I do feel like we've lost a little bit of that American pragmatism that says, I don't care if it's conservative. I don't care if it's liberal. Tell me what works. Tell me what will make, the biggest impact or the most change in a way that's positive. And you almost get the sense, and I'll throw in some more political stuff, you almost get the sense that, like, for instance, with the gun control issue in the United States, that even if you're wrong, you would rather be wrong on your side than have to switch over to another way of looking at things. And, this is especially true with things like people who own semi-automatic guns or rifles. Studies show that these things do not make your home safer. Most burglaries happen during the day when families are away from the house. You're far more likely to get shot with your own gun than you are to actually shoot someone that enters the house. If you have a gun, they're more likely to shoot you. And on top of all of that, and here's something that's really kind of dark, you're 2/3 more likely to use the gun on yourself in a suicide attempt. There's been a lot of research that showed that if you own a gun, you're actually more likely to consider suicide than if you don't own a gun. All of this stuff is pretty well established but people still love their guns, and they're going to be wrong because they're so entrenched in that perspective.
Yeah, it's like people want to believe what they want to believe, and to heck with the facts.
Yes.
And that's very frightening, because to me, all we have is reality. All we have is the facts, and without that, we have no power.
Yes.
So if we just hold on to our beliefs, then we kind of go into this mass psychosis, right, where everyone's living in this fantasy realm where what they want to believe is the truth now, and not what's actually real.
Yeah, and I do have to, and I guess this is the part of me that wants to be fair to both sides. I do think that this is not just a conservative issue. I think that liberals can be guilty of this as well. We want to look at certain issues, whether it's healthcare, whether it's economics, or whether it's, whatever it may be. And sometimes we want to buy into the narrative, even if we do not have the information to back it up. And I guess that's all I'm saying is I would like to get back to a point where we do value smart people that have spent time researching these subjects. Because if someone comes along and they have really researched an issue, I don't know where my opinion factors in. If anything, I just need to learn and appreciate kind of what they bring to the table, instead of saying, well, I know you worked really hard on this, but actually I think this.
Right. I don't care that you've studied this for 3 years and you've done rigorous research. I have an opinion. Yeah. And I can talk louder than you.
Exactly. And that sort of approach is just difficult. In fact, I think that, if you do consider yourself liberal, I do think you have a moral obligation to study some of the conservative thought leaders. And likewise, if you're conservative, I do think that it behooves you to see why people disagree with you. When we study the other side, the other opinions, and we get a more rounded idea, I think we can build a consensus, which is helpful. And, I don't know necessarily if we're there right now, which is a little bit disappointing.
Well, I definitely don't think we're there. And when you were talking, I started thinking that, doing your homework, reading about the other side, or just reading about research, reading facts, requires work, it requires effort. And it seems to me that there's a huge laziness that has overtaken society, North American society, that we don't want to bother to learn things. We just, look at a celebrity spouting off, or we form our own opinion, and that takes no effort. It requires nothing of us. But having to actually learn the facts, we have to apply ourselves. And can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think, there's two things to consider about this. I mean, on one hand, there's so many issues out there. We can't, make our weekends just simply a fact-finding mission to learn more about everything that's out there. There is a certain point where we say, I can't dedicate my life to learning all things. And at a certain point, I have to just enjoy my life. At the same time, though, I do think one of the things that makes life truly enjoyable is pushing yourself and learning new things. If you're watching the news and, you're watching the, horrific terrorist attacks that are going on in Belgium and in Paris, to say, what, I really don't understand the Middle Eastern culture. I don't understand what's going on that is fueling extremism in other parts of the world. What if I what if I read a book? What if I, did a little bit, talked to some people? And I think a lot of it comes down to this idea of empathy. If we can really appreciate where people are coming from, what's going on, what's happening, it builds a level of empathy that both humbles us and pushes us towards wanting to learn more.
I really like that point, because it's very interesting that you're connecting empathy to motivation. And, what is it that motivates somebody to learn things? And I agree with you. It can be very overwhelming. There's so much going on, and you really don't want to spend your whole life as a student. However, I agree that we do need to spend some time knowing what's going on, because it empowers us.
Yes.
Knowledge is power. So if we care about our world and we care about each other, and even if we care about ourselves, just plain self-interest, hopefully that can motivate us to overcome our inertia and learn some more things and stretch our brains a little bit. Just like we recognize we need to stretch our bodies, we need to work out physically, maybe we also have to be motivated by caring to work out psychologically or intellectually.
Oh, absolutely. And I do think that there's this idea that when we lack empathy, we begin to adopt an attitude, and I mentioned this in the essay that I wrote. We develop an attitude that certain problems are just too complex to solve, that there will always be racism, that we will always have to deal with poverty, and that these things are not going away, that we'll always have disease. And this sort of mentality, I think, really stifles progress. When we truly care about the poor, at a certain point we say, you know what? Maybe we can solve this problem. And if we can't solve it within our lifetime, maybe we can push this a little bit further, progress just a little bit farther down the road to say, what are the, root causes of poverty? What are programs that work? What doesn't work? Are there things that the government can do? What are the limits to what government can do? Is this something that can be accomplished? And I think that empathy really builds us towards that, to say, you know what, this is, I think about, I named my daughter Kennedy, and my daughter gets really upset because whenever she gets really mad about her homework, I always quote John F. Kennedy when he said that we should go to the moon. And his statement was, we should go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And I always remind her of that from her namesake, that sometimes she needs to do things because it's hard. And I feel like with some of the big issues in our lifetime, whether it's terrorism, whether it's racism, poverty, disease, I think that we should approach it with that same kind of attitude, that we should work towards solutions because the solution is so difficult and complex. It's not going to be an easy fix. And I wish that we could get back to that spirit. In some ways, I feel like now we're more managing the sort of the symptoms, and we're not really trying to really strike at the causes of some of the things that, that we struggle with.
I completely agree with you. And in my work, I do a lot with people on trying to help them live their best life and be their best self. And I think that doing things that are challenging is very much a part of that, because when you take on a complex challenge, you become more empowered, you become more confident, you become more joyful, because in applying yourself in that way really is bringing out all your best attributes and testing your limits and pushing you further than you thought maybe you could even go. And so what you're saying really resonates with me.
Oh, absolutely. I think even, we get so afraid of failing, but, the thing about it is, and let's take weightlifting as an example. I might be able to lift 100 pounds over my head. I don't know if I can. It doesn't mean that I'm a failure if I can't lift a car over my head. At the same point, let's say academically, I want to learn a new language. Well, just because I can't speak French fluently does not mean that it's a wasted effort if I learn a few French phrases and a few French expressions and words, and having that knowledge is, I think, inherently enjoyable. And so even if you do not become the ultimate or the best at something, just simply pushing yourself in that direction, I think it's worthwhile.
So you're really saying that we need to appreciate the journey, not necessarily the destination.
Oh, absolutely. And I know that that's a little bit of a cliche, but it's absolutely one of those truths that I think you can just hang your hat on. I don't know if if it's a mixed metaphor there, but I mean, but it is one of those things where, hang your hat on the destination, not the journey, not the destination. I don't know, but I do think that, what is the destination? We can never know when we arrive where we're supposed to arrive. But we do know when we're on the journey. And I think that's the difference. As a writer, I thought, I started off writing comics, and I thought, once I get a comic published, then I'm going to be happy. And I found that once I actually achieved that, I wasn't that happy. It's not that I wasn't, enjoying myself, but once that came, I was like, well, I would really be happy if I got, more readers, or if I got another thing published, or I'm not quite happy with how this turned out, and I would like to do something more. And so what I found is some of the successes that I had 10 years down the road, I would have been thrilled when I first started off if I had achieved those things. But once I was there, it wasn't as satisfying. And so it's that idea of, when do we actually reach the destination? I don't know if everything is that simple, but I certainly know when I'm on the journey, and if I can appreciate that and enjoy that, there's value in that.
I agree with you. I was wondering if you could comment on perfectionism as an obstacle to intellectualism.
Oh, that's interesting. I do think that I don't know, that's tough, because the intellectuals of the world, and I'm not just talking about the armchair philosophers, I'm talking about the people who really devote themselves to learning a subject. They are, in a sense, perfectionists. But at the same time, well, here, I'll give an example. The better writers that I've known have been the least concerned about typos. And I think because at a certain point they've gotten so good at their craft that they realize that typos are sort of a natural evil in what we do, that typos happen, that sometimes they're difficult, if not impossible, to avoid. And so, yeah, I do think at a certain point you achieve a certain level of proficiency to where you understand what is reasonable and unreasonable when it comes to perfection. And I don't know if that's a straightforward answer, but I do think that there is some truth to perfectionism can sometimes drive us, but at the same time, we have to temper that with the reality of what is possible in what we do.
It's because what I was thinking is that when you gave the example of lifting 100 pounds over your head but not being able to lift a car, and if you have this perfectionistic notion, yes, you think, I should be able to lift a car, and why should I even bother trying to lift 100 or 200 pounds when it's never going to be good enough?
Yeah, I see that. I think, it reminds me a little bit of when I was teaching. I was a classroom teacher for about 12 years. I taught English and creative writing, and I had certain students that at one point in their career as a student had been told that they weren't a good student, or that they weren't that smart, or that math wasn't their thing, because I guess someone told them once that if you're a math person, you can't be good at English, or if you're an English person, you can't be good at math. And this sort of narrative, they said, since I can't be great at it, why even bother? And that was one of the hardest things that I had to deal with as a teacher, was to say, I don't care if you think that you're not smart. The fact is, you can learn this, and you are capable of learning this. And there's this idea, I don't think it happens in elementary school. Kids in elementary have a love for things without really appreciating how bad they are at it at times. Every kid likes to draw, but at a certain point, we stop drawing when we realize that our drawings are not as good as other people's drawings.
Yeah, we become self-conscious.
Yes.
We get cast out of the Garden of Eden because we have self-knowledge, and it's become self-criticism, right?
Yeah. And so, why do we stop coloring? Why do we stop drawing? And I do think it comes at a point where in high school or in junior high, we see someone who draws something amazing, and our options are either in our head are either to quit or to get snarky and criticize the person who's achieved excellence. And, so maybe there is that idea in anti-intellectualism that if we can't learn it, then how did that guy learn it? Or how did this person accomplish it? And, exceptional people, they exist. And, I'm a firm believer in Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours theory that, in order to really become an expert at something, you have to dedicate time, a lot of time to it. And I think instead of, criticizing those people who have achieved great things, near perfection in what they do, we have to say, they've clearly put in the time to achieve those things. And instead of being critical of them, let's admire it. Let's appreciate what they've been able to accomplish.
I love that idea. I really agree that we have to put in hard work and effort if we want to get better, and we can't just expect to be good at something right away, although I guess some people have a natural gift, but for the rest of us, most of us, we have to apply ourselves.
Yeah, and those things, I mean, I hate to say it, but not everyone is going to be Bill Gates. Not everyone is going to create some of the things that he's created. Not everyone is going to, do these great, great things. And so we do have to appreciate the people who have specialized and who have sacrificed quite a bit, to accomplish these things. But for the rest of us, I do think that we can cultivate a certain level of appreciation. So once again, I can't lift a car over my head, but let's appreciate the fact that I can lift the bar up over my head, and then I get to appreciate what other people have done at a much higher level. It's no different than developing a palate for fine food or learning how to play an instrument. I'm not a great guitar player, but I certainly appreciate the excellence of certain people when I've sort of stuck my toe into those things.
So really what you're saying, and if I can translate it into my living your best life, being your best self idea, is that we all get to be the best version of who we are.
Yes.
And we don't have to compare ourselves with others or compete with others. We can appreciate our own special attributes and abilities, and we can appreciate what other people have to offer, and everyone benefits in that way.
Yeah, I think so. This is one of the reasons why, and I brought this up in the essay, this is one of the reasons why celebrity culture really concerns me at times, particularly with reality television shows. We have shows where people are famous for being attractive, or they're famous for no other reason than the fact that they've accumulated wealth or their parents have accumulated wealth. And there's this idea that instead of people really working to become great at things, they sort of just become complacent with where they are. And so that's one of those things where in order to achieve our best self, I really do believe that it requires work, but it also requires an ability to say, you know what, I may never be good looking enough to be on The Bachelor, but gosh darn it, I'm a decent writer and I can be happy about that.
Right. So we can find our own best qualities, and they don't have to be the same qualities as the other person.
Oh, absolutely. It worries me that Sean Penn, American film actor, decided at one point that he wants to be a diplomat without the permission of the United States. He went to other countries to speak on behalf of the United States when we hadn't asked him to. And it's like, you know what, Sean, you're a really talented actor, but there are people who have spent their lifetime studying, international law, politics, the cultures and just how these governments are run. Please, there's this idea that we can kind of jump into things without actually taking the time to learn about them. And it can become dangerous. Why is, and this happens quite a bit in the United States government, where we put people in charge of certain committees who have no expertise in those areas. We'll have someone who's in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency who doesn't believe in climate change. Those are ridiculous things to do, and yet that happens sometimes. And, I'm kind of flying all over the place, but hopefully people are keeping up with me here. I do worry that sometimes in the effort to be great at everything, we don't appreciate the effort that it takes to actually achieve excellence on things.
And I agree that we don't have to be dilettantes. We can
Yes.
think about where our talents lie and where our interests lie and focus on one thing. And the Sean Penn example is very interesting because he is a brilliant actor,
Yeah.
but he's not a diplomat. And he actually got into quite a lot of trouble for that little episode in, I think it was in Colombia or in Mexico, something like that, with a drug dealer, a big drug kingpin. He got into a lot of trouble. And so I think we need to maybe focus our attention, focus our energies on one or two things and not be dilettantes and not think we can, like you said, we can be great at everything, and not think that because we're good in one area that naturally extends to another area that's quite different.
Yeah, and this comes back to the whole idea of protecting the nerds. I talk about Ross Geller from Friends. Nerds if anything, are defined by their obsessions. They are defined by their interests and the things that they're passionate about. And I do think that there is an importance in looking out for those people and protecting those people. It's the nerds who, create vaccines and build bridges, and they're the ones who, create the science that puts people, not creates the science. They're the people who study physics necessary to put a person on the moon. When Neil Armstrong is heading towards the moon in that capsule, he wants to make darn sure that math is correct. And it's nerdy people who spend hours, if not years, of their life perfecting those things. And that is commendable. Not everyone has that ability. And, those who do that, I think that they deserve our respect. And for people who maybe are not that way, I do think that there is we're kind of repeating ourselves here, but I do think there is a call to appreciate, to respect, to push ourselves, and to learn.
I agree. And I think, back to the best self, best life idea, everyone has something within them that they can develop, right?
Yes.
We can develop our physical strength with exercises you gave an example about earlier, or we can learn something. We can become better parents. We can become better citizens. We can be more involved or engaged with our family. So there are always ways that we can improve ourselves, and certainly ways that we can learn more. And we don't have to be, if we're not that nerd, we don't have to be the uber nerd. We can just be a better version of me.
Yeah, and I think that there is also something to be said for becoming also intelligent about your passions. I'll give an example that's not academic related. I had a student. He's just an inspiration to me. When he was my student, he was overweight. He was a funny guy. He was a sweet guy, but he was overweight.
By the way, how old are these students?
Well, my oldest former students are now in their 30s. And my youngest former students, I think, are now in their 20s. So that's kind of the range. But when I was teaching them, they were in high school.
Okay.
And this kid, he was overweight, and he had problems with his weight. And as a result, I think he often used humor and other things to deflect his insecurities. Last time I talked with him, he won I want to say he achieved a world record in weightlifting for his particular class. He became an incredible weightlifter. And the guy is just, he looks like the Incredible Hulk now. He lost all of that fat, and he became just muscle-bound like you would not believe. But here's the other thing about that is, in order to achieve that, yes, it requires hours upon hours in the gym, but it also required him to be very smart about his passion. He had to learn how to build muscle. He had to learn about diet. He had to learn about calories. He had to learn about form and technique. And I think that he can appreciate and respect the achievements he's had in his life because of not only the work that he's put in, but also the level of intellectual rigor that it's required in order to do the things that he does. And so I don't want to suggest that only the mathematicians and the engineers are the smart ones out there. I think anything that we pursue, from cooking to fashion to, you name it, I do think that when we become a little bit more sophisticated about the things that we care about, we can appreciate them more.
So again, you're really saying that we need to stop being complacent and use our, intelligence correctly or wisely, and not just fall down on opinion, but really stretch ourselves a little bit more.
Yeah, and in the case of my former student, literally stretch ourselves. I am sure that when he first went into the gym, it was uncomfortable for him. When he went in there, he was not the muscle-bound person that he is now. He wasn't. And so at a certain point, you have to push past that uncomfortableness. And likewise, if anyone wants to achieve, a more satisfying, fulfilling life, I do think that one of the first steps is almost always getting out of our comfort zone and saying, you know what, I really love, let's say I love ballet, and, I would really love to do that. But in order to accomplish that, I'm going to have to be terrible at it first. and I'm going to have to be okay with being terrible about it and keep pushing myself to trying to get better at it.
Right, tolerating our own imperfection or inadequacy as we're getting better and improving at whatever it is we're passionate about.
Yeah, I think we put way too much priority on the idea of the instant genius or the prodigy, and very rarely do we appreciate just the amount of time that goes into what people do. And so if someone wants to accomplish something, yeah, you're gonna look awkward for a while. You're gonna be flailing about, and if we can enjoy those times and appreciate those times, I think overall it'll be much more rewarding.
Would you be able to share in your own experience some, examples of you pushing yourself past your own comfort zone?
Um, well, I think for me it probably was in the area of writing. Um, I have dyslexia, and when I grew up, I could not, I got held back in school in first grade. I wasn't able to, the words just weren't coming together quite well. And it wasn't until I picked up a comic book and saw how the comic book groups words together in balloons. That actually is a technique that is very helpful for people with dyslexia. The illustrations helped reinforce what I was reading. And over time, I kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. And now, I'm a person who has dyslexia, and my job consists of looking at words all day. And so there is a certain irony in that I specialize in words, and yet reading is hard for me. But it's also one of the things that I enjoy doing most of all. And I'm sure that part of that informs my own opinions and outlook on what we're talking about today is, the thing that I pursued was the thing that was hard for me. And I will admit, I have made some embarrassing mistakes that I wish I could blame on dyslexia, but it may have just been carelessness. I remember I once wrote a letter to a literary agent, and I was talking about a story about a police officer who investigated a school shooting, and I used the word instigating instead as an accident. And let me tell you, a story about a police officer who instigates a school shooting is completely different than one who investigates a school shooting.
Wow.
And that was embarrassing. And one of those things, I know that you write, and one of the things that's really hard about writing is once you've written it and published it, all of a sudden people have opinions and they point out things that they disagree with, and you're never going to make everyone happy. And that can be really humbling when things go before an editor, when you're trying to make your work as good as possible. And sometimes you're going to write stuff that just isn't that good, and I've certainly been there.
Yeah, for sure. I've been there too. I remember the first draft of my first book. It was a monstrosity, and I will never forget the kindness of the first readers who were willing to plow through all the muck to find the little potential gems in there. So I completely understand what you're saying. And I really appreciate you sharing your personal story, because you really are an example of what you're talking about. You are practicing what you preach in terms of, overcoming obstacles, meeting your challenges head on, and doing the thing that you really want to do, despite the fact that it's hard or because it's hard. So I really appreciate that story.
Yeah, and I do think that there is something to be said for, and I think there's some parallels here. The kid who is overweight does have sort of, to use a Southern expression, has a dog in that fight. If you've been overweight and all of a sudden you pursue physical fitness and weightlifting with gusto, in part it's because of where you were. And likewise, as someone, reading was difficult for me, I venerate it on a level that other people may take for granted. And so there is something to be said for that sometimes when we are strong in the weak places, we appreciate those things a little bit more than other people might.
I agree. And there's something wonderful about rising above those particular personal challenges that make us feel that much better in our lives, better about ourselves, and just more optimistic and happy in our lives, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And, I do think that there's a correlation between happiness and hard work, that at the end of the day, when you've really put in that time, you're going to be happy, maybe not because you've achieved that thing, but you've pushed it a little bit further down to achieve something great in the future.
I agree. I remember when I was a kid and I had a big aha moment studying for a test. I think I was about 12 years old, and it was the end of the day, and I'd spent the whole day studying, and I got up from my desk and I felt really, really good. And I realized that it wasn't because I knew everything I needed to know. It's just because I felt like I had put in a really good day of work, and I felt very happy with myself. And I realized that, okay, I think I've got an insight here I can use for the rest of my life. And I basically have done that. I've put in the hard work, and it's really paid off. I can definitely say for a fact that I've lived it and it works.
Yeah.
Work works.
Oh, no kidding. Well, and it's so funny. My daughter is 11 years old now, and this happens almost every day with math, where she will come to my wife with her homework and say, "I don't get this math problem." And April will say, "Have you looked at it?" And she's like, "Yes, I don't understand it." And inevitably, while she's looking over it, she'll have this moment where she's like, "Oh, wait, I understand." And it is funny because I think she assumes that because she didn't get it the first time, she'll never get it. Mm-hmm. But the great thing about our brains are our brains are problem-solving machines, and it will keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. And yeah, the thing that you couldn't achieve before, you can get there, but it may require being wrong for a while until you actually come to the right answer. And, my daughter with her math homework, this is one of those things that really concerns me in our education system is what is it about, certain students that they give up on a subject where they used to really love math and science in elementary school, but once they get to high school, they just abandon it. And I can't speak to Canada's school system, but in America, we really need engineers and mathematicians. And if everyone wants to become, I don't know, I'm trying to not pick on any particular major. If everyone wants to become English majors, I'll pick on my own major. We're going to have problems. We need people who are willing to learn those harder subjects. And, why is it that, some people that love those subjects when they're young, that just when it becomes really difficult, they let it go?
Well, I think what you were talking about in terms of the instant prodigy mentality, I think might be an issue, right? If we aren't great at it from the start, and that's also part of the perfectionism thing that I was talking about. Yeah. If we aren't great at something from the start, and we can't tolerate our flailing about, as you mentioned, then we might just want to give up on it. And it's somehow our society does not encourage us to persevere in the face of challenges. It really promotes a certain laziness of attitude, right? Instant everything, instant gratification, instant soup, instant results. And so if we're not instantly adept, then sometimes we're encouraged or, it's just easier for us to say, I give up. And that's unfortunate because I think if we persevere, what it does is it makes us feel, oh, I can do this. And all it requires is a little extra effort.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I wonder, and I would kind of turn to you, do you think that young girls are more susceptible to that frustration than young boys are? I read an article somewhere, and this is the problem, is I read stuff somewhere and then I don't remember where it came from. But I did read an article that suggested that girls are more susceptible to getting frustrated with things that they aren't able to accomplish automatically. Whereas what do you think?
I really don't know, because I certainly have seen boys giving up on certain types of tasks that did not come naturally to them. So it could just be the type of task that boys maybe have more natural affinity toward, whereas girls might have an affinity toward other tasks. And so it could just be the tasks that we have less affinity for that we're more prone to giving up on.
Yeah, and it may not be a gender issue. I do know that in the classroom, there have been studies that show that teachers will give boys more time to answer a question than they will girls. The study involved basically observing teachers asking questions to their students. And with the boys, if they asked a boy a question, they might give that boy about 3 extra seconds before they then turn to someone else or they answered the question for them. Whereas the girls, they were a lot faster in sort of moving on to the next person. And when I was a teacher, it made me very conscious to say, okay, make sure that I give the girls the same amount of time as I give the boys to answer these questions, because I do think maybe there's this expectation that the girls should get it. And yeah, maybe that factors into it. I don't know. But it is interesting that there have been studies looking into, how does gender factor into our expectations of what people should be good at, or even how good they should be at it, how quickly.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a complicating factor. But I think as a general rule, I do believe we're living in a society that promotes lazy thinking and just lazy behavior. And being a couch potato is celebrated, and being kind of mindless is celebrated. You mentioned reality TV, and I think back to Jerry Springer and how that kind of behavior was really celebrated in a big way, and continues to be on these shows where they throw chairs at each other.
Yeah.
Right. So being a lazy thinker and being a lazy person and being kind of an airhead is very much rewarded, whereas taking the time to consider something, learning the facts, speaking from a position of knowledge, those things are not rewarded as much, and that's very unfortunate. And it definitely doesn't encourage students to go that extra mile. And even your daughter, I wonder whether she's in a culture where it's more easy to give up than to just persevere, and you as a parent have to keep pushing her in the other direction toward persevering.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing with reality television is that I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, it's my guilty pleasure, or, I watch it because I like to make fun of them. But I would have to think that on some level, we are, I don't know, condoning bad behavior when we watch certain shows and popularize them. It's amazing, particularly some of the shows that are reality shows where it's just basically people behaving badly. You can see some of that behavior mirrored, maybe not in the adults that watch those shows, but definitely in younger kids as they begin to kind of test out their personalities. All of a sudden, this becomes something that is on the spectrum of acceptable behavior. And it is worrisome. With my daughter, I think one of the challenges we have is that she loves her phone so much.
Yeah.
And, I remember when I was a kid and I spent quite a bit of time on the phone. But, of course, at that time, my phone could not access the entire Internet and all of human knowledge and, more videos and BuzzFeed articles and all of these things. And, it's hard to get too angry at her, because I think about all the hours of the day that I have wasted just mindlessly scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through all the posts on Facebook. And it is, I think that it does require a certain level of consciousness to say, I really need to put this aside. And, one of the things I suggest is to read a book. Reading a book is wonderful because it is so antithetical to the experience that we have on Facebook.
That's wonderful. And I was actually just thinking about asking you for your call to action. So I guess that would be part of it, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I think, and once again, you're speaking to a former English teacher who has very strong opinions about reading. But I do think that the experience of setting aside the distractions of our world, picking up a book, it can be a digital book, on a tablet. It could be a paperback. But there's something about picking up a book and spending an hour reading, even 30 minutes reading, that it focuses us, it relaxes us, it engages us on a level that, I watch, an hour of television, and it's almost like consuming junk food, and I'm a fan of junk food, but I can't live off of that. And likewise, if I spent my entire existence watching, the Real Housewives of Orange County, there's just something there that is kind of junky as opposed to reading a book. And I'm not one of those people that think that the only books you can read are snooty, high literature, classics. I think that you can read pulp fiction. You can read silly romance novels. I honestly think that simply the activity of reading is inherently valuable, even if the stuff that you're reading is on some level silly, playful, escapism, what have you.
Comic books.
Comic books. I am a big fan of comic books. And yeah, there's something that when I read a comic book and I sit down and just sort of involve myself in that world, when I get out of it again, I feel good. I think intellectually it's the equivalent of that endorphin rush that you get when you go jogging.
It's like health food for the brain.
It really is.
Or a good workout.
Absolutely. And I just have a hard time believing that there is a wrong way to read a book when you're really getting into it. My mom always said to me, that she just was happy that I was reading, And I think about some of the books that I read when I was in junior high. I read a lot of Stephen King. And I think if my mom knew what was in some of those books, she probably wouldn't have wanted me to read them. But I read them and I enjoyed them, and it really cultivated a love of learning. As a teacher, it was very frustrating that sometimes we spent a lot of our class convincing people why reading was a painful activity and why they shouldn't do it. Because if you look at the kind of books that we recommend, they're not the kind of books that you might choose for yourself to read.
Right, absolutely. So read whatever you enjoy reading is really what you're saying.
Absolutely. I would add to that, though, that I think in that diet of reading what you enjoy, I do think once you become more comfortable with reading, there is that opportunity to read books that do challenge you a bit. I think, some of my favorite books are some of the most controversial books, too. My favorite book of all time is Huckleberry Finn. I really love the book Lolita, which is clearly a controversial novel. Satanic Verses by Solomon Rushdie, also one of my favorite books. These are some of the top 3 most controversial books of all time. And there's something about those books that they create a dissonance in what you read that is healthy. I think it's satisfying. And so I do think that there is that. I think if you're prone to reading comedies, I think there's something to be said for reading something that upsets you or makes you sad. I think that both adults and children have a right to the full spectrum of human experiences. And, it's okay to cry at the end of a movie, and it's okay to read a book that when you close the book, you go, wow, that really made me sad. Those kind of experiences are valuable and they're meaningful.
I love what you're saying. It calls to mind Maurice Sendak, who respected children, and even Roald Dahl.
Yes.
And they wrote books that were upsetting because they said that, that's part of life.
Absolutely. And, those kind of experiences, you don't want to shelter your kid from those kind of things. If my daughter reads something and she cries at the end of it, I'm not going to throw that book in the fireplace. And if anything, it begins a conversation. What about the book upset you? My daughter, I'm so proud of her. She is a strong advocate for LGBT rights. And she's 11 years old, and yet she has a very sophisticated appreciation for, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans issues. And part of it is because she engaged with her culture, and she found out some upsetting things. She wasn't shielded from that. And she is the first person to protect kids in her school, if they are gay. And those kind of things, it makes a parent proud that because of her experience in the world and the fact that she wasn't sheltered from the bad things that happen in this world, it increased, here's back to that word again, it increased her empathy. And I think it makes her a better person because of it.
So you're really saying that there's this wonderful loop where when we're empathetic, we learn more.
Yes.
And when we learn more, we're more empathetic.
It's amazing how that works, but it is absolutely the truth. And I see it in my daughter, and I see it in other people as well. As we learn, we realize how little we know, and then it causes us to want to learn more.
And to do better,
Yes.
I guess, in the world, right?
Absolutely. And and that's not to say that there aren't highly intelligent people who have used their great minds for self-serving ends. But at the same time, I have to believe that at a certain level we appreciate and respect the knowledge that we learn, and we want to do good things with it.
Well, that's a wonderful note to end on. I really appreciate talking to you today. It was really, really
Oh,
exciting
likewise.
and
Thank you.
thought provoking, and it warmed my heart as well. And so it was a lot of fun. If people want to find you, where would they find you online?
Online, my website is thatdavidhopkins.com. So it's not the David Hopkins. I thought that might be a little bit presumptuous. It is thatdavidhopkins.com. I'm also on Twitter at David Hopkins, and then medium.com. I am at that David Hopkins. So easy to find.
Well, thank you again, David. It's really been a pleasure. And is there any article coming up that you want to flag for future readers?
Well, interestingly enough, there is a possibility that the essay that I wrote might get turned into a book. And so when this airs, there is a good possibility that I will be knee-deep in manuscripts and drafts, first drafts, second drafts, third drafts. Whatever it was about this essay that struck a chord with people, I've been talking with an agent right now, and there's a possibility we might be able to turn it into a book. If that doesn't happen, then I'm always writing something for some of the local publications in Dallas where I live. So Dallas Morning News, D Magazine. I'm always trying to do something there.
I never got the title. I never announced the title of that article. Could you share that with the audience just before we go?
Oh, yes. How a television sitcom let me get this correct. I've been looking at it all week. How a TV sitcom triggered the downfall of Western civilization.
Well, that's a good title, and I'm sure if you do the book, it's going to be a very interesting book.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see if it happens, and if it happens, how it's going to come across. Speaking about the idea of challenging ourselves, this will be a challenge for me.
Well, keep me posted.
Will do.
Because I would definitely publicize it if it does become a reality.
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks again, David. All the best, and it's really been a pleasure.
Likewise. You have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. That was the brilliant David Hopkins, and I'm Dr. Marcia Sirota. If you like this podcast, please review it on iTunes. You can also sponsor me on Patreon at patreon.com/Dr. Marcia Sirota. And please sign up for my free monthly newsletter at marciaSirotaMD.com.